slightly too far.
Hey guys, so it's Coach Roberts and
Coach Roberts Jr.
this is Riley. Okay, I'm not gonna say that many times. We are the Lit Gang. Okay, total cheese fast, but just for your enjoyment. Riley and I are going to talk to you guys about an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. This is your reading assignment for this week. I hope you've read it. If you haven't, this will help. We're going to go through some of the talking points on the board. I've got your questions that you were assigned. You're spinning.
I gotta chill. I just have to stay moving. Okay.
I'm going to be asking Riley some of those questions. She's going to tell you her perspective on the story. And even as silly as we're being, sincerely, we love reading. I tell you this all the time, your future jobs and your future pay scales can be determined by the vocabulary that you use and you understand. You need to be okay out in that world talking to people and having some intellectual conversations. Now, I know the imagery is probably not going to be at the top of your bucket list, but we need to cover it, so let's get started. Riley.
Debbie.
When I told you that my kids were reading Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, you said...
I love that story.
Why did you like this story? Because how old are you?
19.
She just had a birthday.
Happy birthday.
And you read this story when you were in the 10th grade, right?
Yes.
So that would have been 3-ish years ago. You still remember it?
Yes.
Okay. Y'all always say, we're not going to use this. We never see it again. Sometimes you do.
I mean, it's not useful, but it left its mark.
All right. That's fair. I get it. I mean, you know, we're not going to use it all the time. Tell me, what was your first memory of this story? Why did it stand out to you?
Because the whole time I was reading the story, I was expecting one thing, and then it was like a declaration at the end that was completely opposite of everything that I have ever expected reading it.
Did you like the twist at the end?
I was mad.
Okay.
I was mad. I was frustrated for him, especially, well, I won't get into that.
All right. So let's get to these talking points. We've got number 1 is imagery. Do you want to get started with that, or you want me to?
Well, you can start and I'll add.
Okay. So I would actually kind of talk about the setting of the story. When I have my story here, and if you look, I've got some annotations. Riley's got some annotations. When I say some, it's kind of a lot. But I started noticing the setting, and I love that the story is set in Alabama.
Roll Tide.
We've been talking about realism, and this story is a reflection of realism. There's a lot of true factual things that were happening. So we had what war?
The Civil War.
The Civil War. Good job.
I got really nervous.
Okay.
World War II.
So we have the Civil War, and we know that because it starts, there's a hint where it talks about the Federal Army. So the Union Army, or the Yankees, they were considered the Federal Army. No, we're not. I don't really care. But anyways, so in that first start off, it talks a lot about soldiers and positions. I noticed this word sentinel. I hope that as you annotate, you circle vocabulary words you don't know and you look them up, didn't know what that was. And it's just a guard that was keeping watch. There were a lot of people on the bridge just for one guy to be hung. It seemed like there were men, like a single company of infantry in a line. You had guys at either end of the bridge keeping watch, and then you had this lieutenant that was in charge of everyone. And then you have our main character.
He who shall not be named yet.
Yeah, we don't know his name yet, but we do get kind of some other sense of imagery in the next paragraph where it starts talking about the surroundings. What did you have for imagery?
Well, I started out in the first paragraph because it talks about swift water, 20 feet, behind his back, wrist bound with a cord, cross timber, level of his knees, loose boards. It's very specific as to creating the image of this man and how he is placed, where he is placed. And so I felt like it creates a sense of bondage and desperation. And at this point, whenever you're hung with your wrist bound to a cord, you have a pretty inevitable fate. And so that's kind of what the imagery suggested to me.
I agree. I wondered again why so many folks are there with him, and I'm wondering why. Why is he on this bridge? What has he done? And then I don't even know what paragraph this is, but the one who starts talking, the paragraph starts talking about the man who was engaged in being hanged. So we get some descriptions of him. I noted that he was wearing a well-fitting frock coat. He had no whiskers. And those two things led me to think that this man had money. Because if you don't have whiskers, it means that you're shaving pretty frequently. And during this time period, that would not have been at the top of their list. And having clothes that fit you would also indicate that you had money. Many people had hand-me-downs or wore clothes that were way too small because they couldn't afford new clothes. There's just a lot of imagery that describes this character. Well, I guess it's imagery if it's describing the character, is it?
No, that would be characterization.
There we go. That's what we're getting into there.
Not just English and English teacher.
It's okay.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
So in the first paragraph, whenever it's talking about the spectators, a single company of infantry, and it's talking about all of these soldiers, it's clear that this man does not know these people. And so because of the soldiers and the rigidness of the scene, we assume that the man is some type of hostage, an enemy of the troops, because if he was a friend of the troops, he would not be hung. True. And so then moving into the next paragraph, when it starts talking about the specifics of the man, we start thinking, okay, well, maybe he's not an enemy, maybe it was just the wrong place, wrong time. And so it just creates kind of based on the order, it creates questions with the reader of who is this man and what has he done, and why is a well-dressed, wealthy man,
gentleman,
yes, being hung.
Yes. So as we keep moving, it gets a little confusing in here. It starts talking about the preparations, and again we come into the soldiers, and when they step aside, the plank that he had been standing on, it seems like they're standing on that, and when they pull it away, he's going to fall, and when he falls, he's gonna die. There's nothing, like Raleigh said, his hands are bound, he has no way to defend himself. It's the inevitable. And they also noted his face had not been covered nor his eyes bandaged, which was...
I noted that too.
Did you?
Yeah.
What I think that's it's a common courtesy. I don't know if you're hanging someone, you should do those things. One, because physically there's going to be a response in the body to all that pressure when they're hung. And so to me, I didn't know if that meant that they were being hasty or if they just had that much disregard for him.
I felt like it was a lack of care about who he was or what he sees, but it's also if someone puts a bag over someone's face or something and they're preventing them from seeing them, I feel like it hints that there's a chance that they're going to spare this person's life, because then they can't testify. But to me, them saying that was no chance of sparing his life. There was no chance that they were going to say, be gone, whatever, because he knew who they were and where they were.
Okay. So, do you have anything else on that?
No.
All right. The next section, to me, now I've noted some figurative language. When he closed his eyes to fix his last thoughts on his wife and children, the water touched to gold by the early sun. It starts describing all that's around him, and now he had become conscious of a new disturbance, a metallic percussion, like the stroke of a blacksmith's hammer upon the anvil. So I noted that was a simile, but then it made me wonder, are those gunshots? Like, what is it that's making that noise? Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I felt like it definitely created auditory imagery, and whenever you hear that, it tends to make you like twitch.
It's very fancy. Well,
imagery and types of
types of imagery, auditory imagery.
Okay. Auditory.
All right.
Anyway.
He starts thinking about ways he could escape.
Oh, girl, you skipping some good
okay.
annotation.
Okay.
All right.
Our segment's only 30 minutes long, so.
Nuts. All right, anyway. So, you want me to talk really fast? Okay, so whenever I was noticing this, and it was talking about, the author was using all of these imagery, all of these,
I'm nervous. I can't.
He types in English. What did you call a simile?
Figurative
language. And then it goes to, so like whenever you're thinking you're hearing these things, it's like something that's shrieking, something that's super uncomfortable for you to be hearing. It's not something that you hear normally. But then he talks about what he was hearing was a ticking of his watch. And so it's so unexpected. It's dramatized imagery. And so it speaks to how alert he is and how sensitive he is to the things around him.
Ooh, good point.
But it also speaks to, they didn't strip him or treat him like a criminal in taking him to this place. Because normally, they take your watch, they take your belongings, anything that is of worth to you. But they just hung him.
Again, I think it was rushed. Because they didn't, do any of the normal things that you would do.
Or they didn't find him of any worth at all. Him or his belongings.
True.
And so they just, it didn't matter who he was or what he had.
So you're saying that the gunshots was actually his watch ticking.
Mm-hmm.
And then what about when he's saying, if I could free my hands, I might throw off the noose and spring into the stream. By diving, I could evade the bullets. So is he do you think he's thinking they're going to shoot him if he jumps into the water there?
To me, that entire paragraph, he's strategizing his escape, but it's also extremely unrealistic because he's already said that all he could see were train tracks. There's no one in sight. It's a very desolate area. And so one of my questions that I posed was, what are the chances that he'd actually make it home to his wife? Because he's in the boonies. What are the chances that would actually happen? And what are the chances that he would escape all of their bullets with all of the people around? And I think that's the point of him, of the writer, establishing all of these people around is to say, this whole situation is very unlikely. It foreshadows, the unrealistic nature of him actually escaping.
Then we move to part 2, which is notated, with actual Roman numerals. And we find out his name.
Peyton Farquhar.
It reminds me of Shrek. Is there somebody in Shrek with
Donkey? No, Farquhar, Prince Farquhar.
Yeah,
that ugly one that wanted to marry Shrek's lady.
Anyways, but that's his name, and we get a lot of characterization in this paragraph. That first one, we find out he is from Alabama. He was a slave owner, and he was for the Confederacy. It notes that he was a secessionist, so he was for the South. And circumstances of an imperious nature. Riley and I both actually circled that word. We weren't sure what imperious was, but it means urgent or commanding, something that was superseding him joining the Confederate Army kept him at home. Did you speculate as to what it was? Do you think it was just because he was rich or he was a plantation owner that kept him home?
Well, none of it made sense to me because, even whenever he was, escaping and everything, there was no physical, I don't know.
Okay. So, we've got, I noticed an allusion for me where it talked about the fall of Corinth. Now, Corinth, I didn't look it up, sorry. It could actually be a city. Or it could be kind of a biblical allusion to Corinth and the city of Corinth. So, moving on, he decided that since he wasn't going to be a soldier, he would do his part in the war. So, he is allegiant to the Confederacy. And it talked about no service was too humble for him to perform in the aid of the South, no adventure too perilous. So they're painting him as a very loyal, dedicated Southern man. He owns a plantation. He has a lot invested. And as I was reading that, I was starting to think, okay, this is something in that nature put him in opposition to that federal army. So with the Civil War having taken place, and we know there were battles fought all around, he had to have done something. Okay.
No.
One of the questions is like, I ask you, like, what was the problem? Who visits Peyton Farquhar, and what plan develops as a result of this visit? Well, in the next paragraph, the visit is from what looks like a Confederate soldier. How do we know? Why do we infer that he's a Confederate soldier?
I guess he's referring to the opposite people as the Yanks.
Well, he also talks about the gray-clad soldiers. So, in Civil War times, the Confederacy wore gray. Do you know what color the
Red.
Union? Blue.
The British.
The British are not part of the Civil War.
It's a World War II, told you.
Oi. Alright, so depending on how familiar you are with Civil War information, this guy comes up, he has on a gray uniform. So to me, I've stayed alive Civil War, I knew that meant he was a Confederate soldier, or so Farquhar thought. They sit down.
Are you speculating that he's a fake?
Well, I get it confirmed right down here, but he does talk about the Yanks are repairing the road. So you're right. He does refer to the Yanks.
Silly.
Which would be a curt word for the Yankees, the Union Army.
The Yanks are repairing the railroads.
And they're getting ready for another advance. Now, if you're a Southern plantation owner, if they're advancing, that means that your property is now going to potentially be impacted. So, he's baiting Farquhar. He doesn't know it, but he's being baited. What is it that he suggests? What idea does Farquhar come up with?
He says, suppose a man, a civilian, a student of hanging, should elude the picket post and perhaps get the better of the sentinel. Sentinel,
Mm-hmm.
said Farquhar, smiling. What could he accomplish? So he's thinking that he can defeat the Yanks by himself.
Not very wise, but he is a Southern man.
And no task too humble.
Right. Again, he has already said he'd do whatever he could to help the Confederate Army. Because this guy does come in and he tells him that the Federal Army has set up at the bridge, but he doesn't indicate that there are a lot of guys there. He's like, there's not a lot of people there. So Farquhar gets the idea.
Wait, pause, just a thought. What I find interesting about that, though, is that the Confederate soldier said any civilian caught interfering with the railroad will be summarily hanged. So, like, he told him what would happen.
True.
But he was willing to risk his family in order to...
Do you think he was willing to risk his family, or was he so arrogant that he assumed he would just...
I think both.
Yeah.
I think that, there's always the risk with anyone, even if they won't admit it to themselves. And so I just find it ironic that all he could think about were his wives and children. I'm wondering if he was feeling guilty because
he selfishly went and,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I felt like his thought was that he could burn the bridge. Because it starts talking about the flood had put a lot of driftwood against the wooden pier, and the wood was dry and would burn. And if you burn the bridge, then they can't I mean, they can get to your property, but you're definitely going to slow them down. So my thought is he begins thinking he's going to burn the bridge. Well, clearly, if he's being hung...
Oh, he was a federal scout. Sorry, I just read that.
Really? Yeah.
I just read that.
Yeah. What Riley's pointing out is at the bottom of this paragraph, it says an hour later after nightfall. So the guy leaves, and say he heads this way, which would be towards the Confederacy, the group of those soldiers. And later on, he comes back that way, which would be towards the Yanks. And at the bottom, our author says the direction from which he had come, he was a Federal scout. So we know, as the reader, that this guy had just tricked him.
Just got played.
Yeah. So, moving on into the third part of our story.
Well, we could note the order here, and I was clearly out of order because that was before he ever got hung. And so,
Yes, it was a flashback.
Yeah, why would the writer place this flashback or prequel to that here?
Well, I think it helps us to understand why he's even on the bridge. Or gives us, I mean, we don't ever get a confirmation of why. But I think we can begin to speculate like we did. Well, he probably got caught trying to burn the bridge and didn't have a good reason. So what would it have
taken away from the story if it had been in chronological order?
Well, once we get through with part 3, I think the twist at the end, it would have been predictable. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't have been shocked. If these things had been in chronological order, I think this would have just been another story. But I think the part that, the reason you remembered it is because you were frustrated.
Suspense.
And you anticipated that predictable ending. Him getting home to his wife and kids. All right. I noted in part 3 that there were physical sensations he felt of being hung. It was very vivid. Explanations of like his head and how his head felt and his neck and his pain and the pressure he felt. God bless.
Corona.
There's... Did you say corona? Don't say that. I noted that there was a simile where he was compared to a pendulum, which we know because we read The Pit and the Pendulum.
Pendulum.
Do you have some kind of problem? Have you read that story?
No. You and Dad were talking about it one time, and then I was like, the pendulum. And so I just started saying.
When we showed this back, you're going to think, why? Okay, so anyways, we know that a pendulum is it's something that hangs, and it just rotates back and forth, which gives us an image of what he would have looked like once they dropped him.
Sorry. Can you imagine a human being?
No, really? I can't. It's late, guys. You know, like, sometimes...
Delirium!
Being cooped up with your fam for a little too much.
I got quarantine-itis.
Yes. We're so tired of this. All right.
You forgot a really good part, though.
Okay.
So, one thing that we noted on here was foreshadowing. And so in the literally the first sentence of the third part, it says that he fell straight downward through the bridge. He lost consciousness and was as one already dead. So, like, he literally declares him dead and then moves on into him being able to feel all of these sensations. And so I thought that was really interesting. Like, why would you say that someone's dead and then all of a sudden...
But he says, as one already dead. I mean, it leaves you thinking...
But if you know the end of the story and then you reread this...
True.
Which
then
is how Homie came into it, then you catch it.
Yeah. Foreshadowing is always easier to find once you've read the story and you go back through it.
Absolutely.
Because how many times do you normally read a story?
One time.
Oh. Just once. That worked
It
out
depends
really
on
well.
how good it is. Like Romeo and Juliet, was not read that again.
But I'm talking about, like, let's say you have an assignment and you're supposed to annotate it. Do you do a cold read or do you annotate the whole
I do a
time?
cold read and then I do an annotation.
Okay.
But that's how they structured it with pre-AP classes.
Right.
We
We do that. We do a cold read and then we go back and annotate. Okay, so anything else I missed?
In part 3?
Well, I mean, I was gonna. What else do you have in part 3?
It talks about whenever he falls into the water, it says that it was getting more distant, and then all of a sudden it began to grow and brighten. And to me, that began without any action. He never said he started swimming, he started thrusting himself upward. There was no action behind it. He just started rising to the surface. And so I found it interesting that, like, then it proceeds to say his hands were tied. And what's the reality that with your hands tied that you're going to be able to go from this deep depth up and rise to the surface?
Right.
So that was kind of a hint and foreshadow for me of, like, how realistic the situation is. And then it goes on to talk about he saw spiders stretching their webs from twig to twig. He saw a million blades of grass. Like, is it realistic for a human to experience such a revelation? Do you look and see a spider going from twig to twig as you're running and escaping the water? Like, with all of this adrenaline rushing, like, are you going to be able to see millions of blades of grass? Like, what is the reality that you're seeing all of this detail?
Okay.
Oh, and then the eye of the man on the bridge gazing into his own through the sights of the rifle. He saw that it was a gray eye. Are you going to be able to see someone's eye color if you're that far away from them? Like, it was just, the imagery got so specific that it was like, how realistic is this imagery? And is it realistic?
I started wondering, like, since first read, since maybe he's experienced a near-death experience, maybe all of his senses were heightened, and he was obviously, like, exaggerating what he saw, but maybe he was just keenly aware because he was so thankful to not have died. That was my thoughts on my first read.
Well, I think that's why he included the thing about his watch, and he was so detailed into it, to say he's so aware right now.
Right.
And to make it seem like, because he is so aware, because he can hear the ticking of his watch, and it's so dramatic, that maybe this is possible.
True. As it moved on, it talked about the, I did believe this. It was realistic. Again, we're looking at this story because it's realism, and when it talked about the soldiers, attention, company, shoulder, arms, ready, aim, fire, that was in contrast when I went back, because it talked about the soldiers had that guns held vertical and no one was, like, aiming at him. But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, he's trying to escape and they're, like, shooting bullets, you know, like Mission Impossible kind of crazy movie, which wasn't really happening in the Civil War. But I noticed, like, as he's diving down and then he's getting away, that shift where he's now left the water and he's on land. And I start to get hopeful because there is so much detail that I'm thinking, somehow, against all odds, this guy has made it.
Well, and if it were to be a dream of some sort, it would seem like he would, like, rise from the water and there would be no troops. Like, it would be happier. Like, there would be all this detail and them firing at him and him dodging and continuing to, like, the situation itself was so realistic and, like, how it would actually happen that I think that created that realism in your mind.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's what baits us when we first read it, and I think that's why we're so disappointed. Especially because as he's running, he's headed home. And for maybe it's just a girl thing, you know, you want him to make it home. You want him to see his wife and kids. And it's like almost there. And then it switches again. He was standing at the gate of his own home. All is as he left it, and all bright and all beautiful. He must have traveled the entire night. He pushes the gate open. He sees his wife. He springs forward with extended arms. As he is about to clasp her, he feels a stunning blow upon the back of the neck. A blinding white light blazes all about him with a sound like the shock of a cannon. Then all is darkness and silence. Peyton Farquhar was dead. His body, with a broken neck, swung gently from side to side beneath the timbers of the Owl Creek Bridge. Was crushed. Like,
I was shocked.
And I felt a little foolish because I thought, well, I had to reread it at that point because I was like, what I really thought when it said Peyton Farquhar was dead, the shock of a cannon, I thought they had like followed him in the woods and they shot him as he was about to see his family.
But then it said swung gently.
Yeah.
The bridge.
Like he never left the bridge. So what do you suppose all that was?
I felt like it was a false reality to escape the pain and realism of death. But it was also like it reminded me, like one of the questions that I had was, how is death and dying perceived in movies and how does that compare? And so when I think of that, I think of how people will like go through these scenes and they'll like see people that they have like wanted to make peace with or something, and like they go through this entire experience, and then all of a sudden there's like a room with light or some sort of light shining through, and then like either they walk into it and they're dead, or they come to and then you're back in the hospital room with everything beeping and they're coming back to life. And so I felt like that was kind of the comparison between like a movie is like that's what had happened. Like he was fighting to see his family again and to make peace and be where he wanted to be, and then he was overcome by death.
Well, and I think it does lend itself to the idea that death is inescapable. Like, when I was doing some reading on the story, it did talk about like that time is subjective. I felt like he was in a state of delirium. Like once I realized what was going on, sadly, I wondered if the hanging took a little while to kill him. Like maybe it wasn't instant. And so in those moments of struggle, physically struggling, and as his brain is, losing oxygen and you begin to hallucinate and think about things, then it starts to make sense, like all of the things. And I thought the same thing you did. Like, that is how movies are. And I've had several movies that really ticked me off that snapped back and the good feeling was automatically gone. And since this story was written far before movies were created, I wonder if some screenwriters read stories like this and enjoy that twist, and so then they implement that into the movies that we seem to watch and enjoy.
I like the question about what it implies about human psychology in the face of death.
Okay, you're talking about
number 6, like the end of that.
All right, in this story, the Civil War serves as a backdrop. Bierce's main intent is to examine the psychology of someone in a life or death situation. What does this story imply about human psychology in the face of death?
Well, like if you look at like anatomy in itself, and like you study the autonomic nervous system, and you have the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems, whenever a life or death situation is happening, your sympathetic system, which is your fight or flight system, kicks in, and that's how your adrenaline is released, and all body processes that aren't needed immediately shut down. And so all you have is like this rush of adrenaline, and like it prepares you to flee. And so I think that like in the midst of this, like his body is wanting him to flee, but he is physically restrained. And so I think his autonomic nervous system kicked in. But because like you're pushing on the carotid artery and you're losing circulation, and like you're losing oxygen to your brain, and you are hallucinating, I think that like the two of those went together. And so with adrenaline mixed with hallucination, that it's why he imagined his escape, because that's what he wanted to do, that's what his body wanted to do, but it's what he could not do physically.
I agree. I think it was I would not want to think about what was physically happening to me. I would want to think of how can I escape. I would want an alternate reality, and I think that's where he goes in his mind, and it starts with how do I get out of here, and then once I'm out of here, where am I going?
Because his fate was so inevitable from the start. Like, you have all of these troops surrounding you, and like they have guns to shoot you if something goes wrong with the rope. And so it's like all odds are stacked against him. And so I think like with our brain, we try and think of any way that this isn't our fate. And so I think that's kind of what was happening in his brain, is just anything but reality. And so I think he escaped his reality with what he wanted to actually happen. but could not happen. So I think that we see what we want to see in the face of life or death.
Mm-hmm. What about number 7? Did you think the outcome of the story was credible and powerful, or did you think the surprise ending cheated the reader?
I feel like it was, reading it the first time, it was definitely very powerful. Because it was, like, it revealed so much about the human body and the brain. But then when I read it the second time, I felt like it cheated the reader because he foreshadowed so heavily. Going back and reading it, that it almost, like, that almost seems like the predictable ending, that he'd already be dead.
Interesting. I felt like, you know, one of the questions, number 5, is like, would the story be different if the events were revealed in order? And we talked about that earlier. You know, personally, I mean, it'd be just another story, sadly, from the war. You know, someone tried to stop the troops, they were caught, they were hung, they died. You know, I mean, it wouldn't. So to me, I would have felt more cheated if it had been in order and my teacher made me read it, because I'd be like, well, this is boring and stupid. But because of that twist at the end, it makes you say, wait a minute, what did I miss? And even with the speculation of what is it that he did to get in trouble, we're not directly told. It's like a little mystery. Like, you have to keep looking for...
Well, it's the hook. Like, if it were to be, here's Peyton Farquhar, and this, you know, he was tricked. Like, it would be so obvious that his fate would be for him to be there. But then whenever, like, a man was hung, and then it's like, well, what did he do to be hung? Who is this man? Like, is he someone that is, you know, an enemy of these people? But it says that he's from Alabama, and we know this is Civil War, so it doesn't make sense. Like, and so, like, it hooks you in, and then you start reading it. But I think if it were to be the opposite, that, yeah, you would just sit and read it because you had to, it would definitely not have left the mark that it did on me from reading it that first time.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed our lit gang. We are hoping to do several of these. We know that it's kind of like improv theater. We know that we're going to make mistakes. But really, this is how reading and learning is. It's organic. Like, it just happens. There's not going to be one perfect way to read a story, to annotate a story. The things that Riley saw, I might not have seen, and vice versa. Doesn't mean that she was wrong. It just meant, like, her detail was deeper in that part. Something spoke to her. So when you're annotating, don't feel like, oh, that's wrong, or I can't do that. It's yours. It's completely yours. You can annotate for vocabulary you don't know. You can write down questions and it makes you wonder. You can put your thoughts, you know, like in the end, you could put this stinks. Like, I don't agree with this. I hate this story. It's stupid now. I just want to encourage you. Like, that is really how you're going to learn. When I was growing up, we were not allowed to write in our books. That was illegal. Really shunned. And that would have helped me so much to understand what I was trying to learn if someone would have encouraged me to do that, because we all know I have attention deficit issues and it keeps me on track. Otherwise, I get lost. I can't keep my spot. I don't know what I was reading. I have to reread it multiple times. But with my annotations, all I have to do is look at my side notes and it reminds me of things that I did learn. So it saves me time.
But also on that point, like, whenever you're annotating, annotation is not, it's not surface. Annotation is always calling you to go deeper within the text. And if you feel like, oh, I don't know that this is necessarily what that means, as long as you can back it up with your thoughts and context, like, it's fair game. And so I think that that's how you grow as a reader, is you look in that depth and then you think, wow, this could be what's happening. And then you think, well, how can I prove that? And then you have a reason to prove it. And that's where growth as a writer and a reader comes from, whenever you can look deeper than the text, but then you can also back up your depth.
And that's how you score a 32 on your ACT in English.
34.
Really?
Yes.
All right. Bye, guys.
Lit gang. Oh! Hit the low. Wait, no. I didn't hit it. I was throwing it to you.
Oh.
Throw it to me.
Got it.
No.
How do I throw it to you?
Just pause it.